you're indicting the social organization of these communities, the parents, the families, the values, the norms. You say a breakdown in civilization. Whose fault is that?
Whose fault? Boy.
Is that the wrong question?
Well, it's a difficult question. I think the first step is simply to acknowledge that there's a problem, and then start thinking about what sort of values need to be revalorized, to use a disgusting academic term, to change that. Um, again, historical causes, I don't know it, but at some point, I mean, it would be good if we could get the left to even acknowledge family breakdown. If it then wants to blame slavery exclusively for it, that would be a step in the right direction, at least. At some point, though, I would say, again, pace my earlier remarks, looking to historical causes may be in some sense accurate, but at some point it's up to a culture to take account and responsibility for itself. But I remember, I mean, Deborah Dickinson has pointed out years ago when I was mentioning family breakdown, just the very complicated relations between males and females in the Black community. And I think that's right. And it's a very tough thing to try and figure out how to fix. I remember doing a ride along in Chicago with this gorgeous Black cop. And, he had a stable job, was going to have a great pension, but he had kids by several different mothers and was married to none of them. And, and that's not, I don't think that is an abusive relationship, but there's real complexity there that I have no ability, knowledge to comment on, but fixing what has become now the pattern of, which you know as well as I do, of multi-partner fertility, where any given female may have children by several different males, and any given male may have children by several different females. That's just a recipe for very, very tragic childhoods.
Yeah,
And
the economist Robert Cherry has actually been writing a little bit about this, and I've multiple partner paternity, and we don't want to traffic in stereotypes here. We'll be accused of doing that. Of course, it's a complex situation, and this is not a typical arrangement for Black child rearing, although the relative frequencies are much higher, and that does matter.
well, out of wedlock birth rate certainly is
Yes,
is
that has
is
become the
typical.
norm. We're talking 70%.
71, yeah.
71, I stand corrected by the lady who's close to the data. Um, and then people will, you know what they're going to say. They're going to say there are alternative arrangements, and the sociologists are not going to line up uniformly behind the causal argument that the family structure actually is related to the outcomes. They're going to have their own arguments because they're hopelessly corrupted. They are, I'm sorry, by the uh, ideology of avoiding victim blame as they understand it at all costs. This is Moynihan. This is an old story. Um, I agree with you once again, Heather, that I think the family is the key. And I think gender relations or inner male female, however you want to call it, dynamic within African American culture are to some degree troubled. The abortion rate amongst Black women is extraordinarily high, for instance, another indicator of out of wedlock births and single parenthood and all of that. I've almost given up trying to have this argument with people because it's a kind of implacable wall of hostility. They'll say that you're saying that Black people are inferior. I'm sure that I'm going to be attacked and vilified, for the cowardly and self-hating agreement with you about this, because they're going to say you're saying there's something wrong with Black people. That's exactly what Ibram Kendi says. That's exactly what Ta-Nehisi Coates says. There's something. What are you saying? There's something wrong with Black people, and this idea that we can fix it. How can we fix it when 300 years of white supremacy, et cetera, et cetera? To which I have an answer, which is nobody is coming to save you. Point one,
Right.
you have no alternative but to address yourself to this matter. Do you want to live in dignity, or do you want to be a permanent ward of the beneficence of white liberals who, by the way, give them enough time and they'll change their mind about the whole thing? I mean,
Right.
that's my argument. I'm acknowledging the catastrophe of the normalization of single parenthood in African America, as if 48 hours a day of adult supervision time were not twice as many as 24 hours a day
Right.
of adult,
Right.
as if adolescent boys and girls were not fundamentally different in their emotional developmental arc, and that the bipolarity of male and female child rearing. No, I'm not ruling out same sex marriages here, but I'm talking about the norm. I'm talking about the fat part of the distribution were not fundamental to getting the socialization of the male and the female children on track. As if the disciplinary supervision of a father were not fundamental in keeping a kid from choosing a gang as his polar point of contact for expressing his masculinity. Discipline, as if that didn't matter, and the ability to sustain it within a household, as if two wages weren't better than one, etc. I mean, so I've tired, I've grown weary of arguing with these people as this slow moving train wreck, which Moynihan called attention to more than a half century ago, weren't unfolding before my very eyes.
And let me just say, of course, that the white underclass has massive problems as well. And you've got, this is what something Charles Murray warned about,
Yeah,
the rising illegitimacy rate there too,
yeah.
and the usual pathologies will follow in its wake. So it's not as if American culture overall is doing really great when it comes to marriage at this point, although the white overall marriage out of wedlock birth rate is now about 27%. So it's still, nearly two-thirds less than blacks, but it's rising, and that's a problem. And the demonization of males is something that goes across the culture. I'm not so sure that that's so relevant in black culture, though. The kind of feminist hatred of masculinity and the traditional male virtues. Yeah, and the other thing about the family breakdown is, we tend to sort of always talk about the individual child who needs the parents, but the other thing is just growing up in a a culture that still has some remnant of marriage expectations left. And Kay Heimowitz, my colleague at City Journal, has written about this, that bourgeois kids, white kids, grow up with a marriage script that says for males, if you want to be a viable mate for a female, you do have to develop certain bourgeois habits of self-control and deferred gratification. But if it becomes the norm that any male can have access to as many females as he wants without having to marry them, then that creates no incentive for staying in school and doing some studying and learning how to deal with authority. So it's a problem as well on a larger basis, that boys, even if they don't have, or that they don't have a norm of marriage. And I think Raj Chetty's research is consistent with that, where he finds that even if you're yourself a product of a single parent home, if you're in a neighborhood that has more married parents, you're going to do better, because that becomes the expectation. And so that's important as well.
I wonder if we are not. I'm older than you. I hope and expect,
I
but
don't think so.
anyway, we're not as young as we used to be, and if we're not just kind of like behind the times, because if you go and talk to these people under 30 years old, and they're against the binary thing, and they're against the gender lines up with sex thing, and what they think about divorce, I'm almost afraid to ask them. I'm sure that they're very liberal about it, and everything. And here we are defending the nuclear family and the traditional normative expectations of the roles that men and women would play and all of that. And
Well, it's
is it?
not
Are we pushing on a
it's
string? Is what I'm asking. Is it a
right.
hopeless kind of thing? The
It's not just the younger generation. This is something that bedevils conservative politicians, and what may partly explain their being tongue-tied when it comes to talking about the family, because conservatives are the divorce rate is huge. I mean, the lot of donors to my institution are on their second and third wives. So I remember there was a moment under the reign of Mayor Rudolph Giuliani when he was still a sane person, not an insane person, and really the greatest mayor, I think, not just in New York's history, but maybe ever, as far as his ideological courage and eloquence in being able to express the basic rudiments of civil society and how what you need for a city to function. But he was on the verge of giving a speech that would go beyond what was the safe harbor for those who advocated welfare reform, which is, well, if you're going to take government support from taxpayers, there's a quid pro quo, and you should do something to better yourself and work and start to develop those habits. The next step that never got done with welfare reform was tackling the problem of the family breakdown. So he was going to give a speech about this, and then I think this was like right on the verge of one of his many, landmine explosions in his own family relations, and so that got shelved, and nobody ever came up, did it again. But many Republican politicians are also divorcees, so it's quite tough. I would say, as awful as divorce is, and I'm the child of divorce, and it really did a number on me in many physically and emotionally. It's better to be the child of divorce than to be the child of no father at all. In obviously, we can all come up with the exceptions of truly brutal fathers, but generally, you're better off knowing that there was a father initially, at least, but in your life, as opposed to one that was merely sporadically there. But yes, it's going to be a very hard thing to recreate our traditional expectations. And we're a country that does not like to impose stigma. And we enforce the marriage norm by stigmatizing divorce. And we certainly stigmatized mothers who had children out of wedlock. Much of 19th century literature, or a part of it, is taking the side of that 19th century single mother who was vilified by her village and turned into a pariah. And we can look at the individual and say, well, that seems heartless. But it's hard to know without stigma for breaking norms that are very necessary on a collective basis, how you enforce them at all. And